getting ready to get started. I'll welcome everybody that's signed in with us this morning. We appreciate you taking the time out to participate on this webinar. So with that, Cindy, I'll let you go ahead and get going.
Thank you. Good morning. On behalf of Lamar Associates Indian Country Training, we'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, Improving Collaborative Partnerships. This webinar is provided by grant number 2015 HEWXK056, and it's awarded by the Office of Community Policing Services, U.S. Department of Justice. Let me start off by introducing myself. I'm Cindy Davis. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for Indian Country Training and Lamar Associates. Before we get started, I'd like to go through a few features of this platform to aid you in getting the full benefit of the webinar. So at this time, please direct your attention to the text chat bar at the left of your screen. Should you have a question during the webinar, type your question in at any time and send it to all presenters, or you can send it to everyone, whichever you prefer. Your questions will be answered in the order in which they are received. If we don't get to your question, we will during the 15 minutes question and answer following the presentation. So we hope that this is a collaborative morning, so please feel free to join in to the discussion. Technical difficulties. Technology is great when it works. That said, if you experience technical issues and suffer a failure of connection, try calling in on your phone or reboot your computer, and the program sometimes will just start back up for you. But don't worry if neither of those work for you. We will have a recorded version that we will send out post-webinar. If we lose the webinar altogether, we of course will reschedule. Immediately following today's webinar, you will be directed to a brief survey and the technical assistance site. There you will find free online courses and resources to view, as well as previously recorded webinars. If there are multiple viewers participating today with you, please email the names and titles to info@lamarassociates.net. And with that, I would like to introduce our presenter today, Walter Lamar. Mr. Lamar has 30 years of specialized law enforcement and security experience, having served as Special Agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Deputy Director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Office of Law Enforcement Services, Senior Advisor to the Director of the Department of the Interior, Office of Law Enforcement and Security, and President, CEO of Lamar Associates. Mr. Lamar recently took a leave of absence to take a temporary assignment with the Pentagon, so we're thrilled to have him back with us. Walter is an enrolled member of the Blackfeet Nation of Montana and a descendant of the Wichita Tribe of Oklahoma. He was raised on the Blackfeet, Wind River, Jicarilla Apache, Navajo reservations, in addition to Oklahoma Indian Country. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Walter Lamar.
Well, thank you, Cindy. To those of you that have joined us this morning, welcome to this Lamar Associates Indian Country Training Institute webinar. We very much appreciate the support of the COPS office, as Cindy said, and for them allowing us to be with you here today. Cindy talked about this, but I'll mention it again. Yeah, we're totally dependent upon technology to bring you today's session. And boy, I got to tell you, there's times that can be pretty wild. It gets a little scary when we've got folks that are all from all over the country that are signed on, and all of a sudden they're looking at a blank screen. So if anything happens, as Cindy said, we're recording this session, and you'll receive a link to be able to view that version. I would invite you to pass that link on to folks that you work with, folks that you know, folks that you think might gain some benefit from what we talk about today. This particular platform, it does take a fair amount of bandwidth. So in other words, you got to have a pretty good internet connection. But if for some reason you do get disconnected, try to jump right back on, and sometimes that works and it'll get you back to us. During the last webinar in February, Cindy was disconnected. Well, trust me, that sends a shiver up all of our spines, because She's the one that signed us onto the platform. Luckily, we were able to continue even with her being disconnected. But fingers crossed, everything goes well today. As Cindy mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, to those that signed on early, you can use this chat bar over to the left. If you want to pose a question, offer a comment, if you want to tell me that I'm too loud or you can't hear me or you're having trouble with your bandwidth, because if we start getting those messages, I'll get rid of the video, so that'll make it a little bit easier for your hardware to stay connected. I can't necessarily watch the chat bar because I'm doing some other things here, but Cindy will try to watch it. And if you ask a question or you make a comment that needs to be addressed sooner than later, Cindy will try to get my attention. But recognize that she's in Oregon and I'm in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. So her getting my attention means that she's got to text me. So we'll work with that if the need arises. I got to say, as I always do in every one of our webinars, I think it's important to take this opportunity to thank you for all the great work and dedication, because you're the ones on the front line that see firsthand the issues that we're working to address in this webinar series. The issues, the drug crimes, the domestic violence, the sexual abuse, violent gang activity, violent crime, housing issues, neglected children, suicide, traffic deaths, truancy. I mean, all of those issues and more is what you see firsthand every day. None of these issues have a quick fix or a simple solution, because if they did, those issues wouldn't be plaguing our communities as they do. I got to tell you, I wished I had a secret sauce to solve all of our community issues, but I don't. You'll find that the information we talk about today it's only as good as you want it to be. It's not an answer or a secret combination. It's merely discussion to prompt action, to give you an idea of some things that can be done, some things that you can do, and maybe some activities that will promote the right kind of action in your communities. When I was an FBI agent, there was a saying, big cases, big problems, little cases, little problems, no cases, no problems. Well, I know that, and Cindy, let me ask you, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, because I noticed that the mic, the light on it wasn't coming on. So
I can hear you fine.
Okay, great. So let me go back to that. I was talking about little cases, little problems, no cases, no problems. Well, that applies to all of us every day. And because you guys have joined us today, I'm going to say that most likely you're the folks who will step up and handle the big problems to take care of our relatives. Big problems require a lot of hard work, and I appreciate that very much, what you do in our communities. Hopefully our discussion today will help take those big problems to manageable problems. Only through hard work, so I say it over and over, I mean, none of this is easy. If it was, anybody could do it, and if anybody could do it, we wouldn't be dealing with the issues that we do in our communities. It's only through hard work, communication, and partnership that we can enact positive change. Cindy said this earlier. I grew up on reservations and in Indian country, Blackfeet, Wind River, Jicarilla, Southern Pueblos, Navajo, and in Oklahoma. Nearly 18 years of my career has been dedicated to Indian country law enforcement, security, and emergency preparedness. My immediate family and my relatives, they live and work in Indian country. So what we're talking about today, I didn't just read about this and study Indian country issues in a book or in research papers. I've lived the issues. Based on my life and career, I got to tell you, and I've said this over and over, I sincerely believe that collaboration, communication, and coordination are the way forward for our communities. It can sound kind of trite and simple, but collaboration, communication, and coordination are the way forward. To do as we always have will get us what we always got. So, as I have in previous webinars, I ask you to visualize the issues in your community. Visualize the issues your community currently faces. Issues that you want to see addressed. Well, I say this every time as well. We are the ones we've been waiting for. It's up to us to make it happen. So before I get carried away, and it's easy to do, I got to tell you, for me, but before I get carried away, always in our communities, we look to start off in a good way. So I'm going to ask you to, in your own way, offer thoughts, words, positive energy as we look to those that have gone before us, those that offered prayers for our well-being. So our thoughts go out to them, asking for the necessary strength, guidance, and directions to make our communities healthy, safe, and secure. For those having grown up or spent time in the tribal community, we've seen change even in our lifetimes. Fewer fluent language speakers, changes in tradition. When we say changes in traditions, as we sometimes say the old way, fewer are around that know that old way, it's a stark reminder that every day bits and pieces of our culture, our identity disappear. Pictured on this slide are my grandmas. And every year at the annual gathering of the Wichita tribe in Oklahoma, they were there at camp. I'd go to their camps to visit, to rest, eat, or just sit. My grandma Ethel, she's the one on the right, she would always make sure I was around when that first piece of fry bread came out of the cast iron skillet. And I would sit there, enveloped in the campfire smoke and her love, eating warm fry bread. Well, sadly, those days are gone, but they're not forgotten. And it's up to me to explain to our young people what it was like to be around our grandmas and our uncles and our grandpas, the folks that are now no longer with us. What was it like to be with them, and what stories did they tell, and what things did they pass on to each of us? A key to community is identity. And we must strive to preserve our identity. But I got to tell you, and as you know, it's harder and harder to maintain language and tradition in this day and age. This past year, my aunt, who was the last fluent speaker of the Wichita language, passed on. The last person who could speak our language. I got to tell you, it's still hard for me to imagine that I will never again hear my dad, my grandmas, and my relatives laughing and talking in the language of our people. But it's still up to us, to me and you, to carry on our identity as best that we can, to make sure that the children of our communities are educated in the ways of our people, that they know their ancestors, that they hear stories and see pictures. People secure in their identities are much more willing to adhere to community accountability standards. If you know your relatives will be embarrassed by something you do, you're less likely to do it. If you think no one cares, then what does it matter? Us working to remind and educate about who we are, this is truly where partnership begins. Today's webinar, it's the third in a series of webinars, 5 in all, counting this one. The next 2 are scheduled in April, putting community policing to work, and also in April, the last webinar in this series, engaging youth in community policing. Well, you can keep an eye out for invitations, just like the one you got for this webinar, with the dates and the times. Our first 2 webinars, collaborating to problem solve and building collaborative partnerships, concentrated on the creation of community collaborative partnerships using a problem-solving methodology. Okay, I'm going to say that a lot as we're talking today. Community collaborative partnerships using a problem-solving methodology. So let me mention at this point that we're in the process of developing an online course in conjunction with the COPS office that will allow you to explore these and related issues in the convenience of your office or your home. And best of all, you'll be able to spend all the time that you need with the online learning version of this webinar. And there'll be links, there'll be glossaries of terms, there'll be all kinds of things that you can explore, research, and dig deeper into these issues. In our first webinar, if you were with us, and I know some of you were, I recognize your names. In our first webinar, Collaborating to Problem Solve, we talked about the basic elements of community policing. Community policing is not complicated. In our tribal communities, we've been exercising that form of policing for time immemorial, where the community is responsible for the action of the community members, and there are ways that we policed ourselves, if we want to even call it policing. But we work together to maintain order, peace, and security. In that webinar, we talked about the SARA model, scanning, analysis, response, and assessment. It's a problem-solving model, and there's a lot of different problem-solving models out there. But this is what's promoted by the COPS office, and it was created for law enforcement. But I got to tell you, I think it's a very simple, easy methodology to follow and employ by our community collaborative partnerships. And then we also talked about the root causes of community crime. And I think, you being at the front line, you recognize that at the root cause of most of the crime that occurs in our tribal communities has to do with substance abuse. And it's substance abuse that as we look at the underlying causes, it's from a sense of sometimes hopelessness, that there's a desire to escape, and it's a desire to escape, and that escape is oftentimes alcohol and drugs. And when people are under the influence of alcohol and drugs, they do things that maybe normally they would never even consider. But once their inhibitions are gone, and some of those deep-rooted problems in their psyche are released under the influence, then sadly, bad things happen in our communities. So we have to address the root cause. Then in our second webinar, Building a Collaborative Partnership, we talked about the importance of bringing together key community members to address issues of concern. And I'll say it over and over, I believe that the only answer to some of the issues we face is bringing together people in these partnerships. We concentrated, as we talked in this last webinar, on group dynamics. In other words, basically a natural result of two or more people coming together for an expressed purpose. We talked about reasons that it can sometimes be difficult, number one, just to get folks to participate, and number two, some of the issues, and you know exactly what I'm talking about from those of you from our tribal communities, you get in some of these contentious meetings, and that stymies our positive momentum. Pretty soon people start falling away. Pretty soon we don't have a collaborative community partnership anymore because of those dynamics in some of the meetings. We covered some I think some helpful ideas in dealing with that, with some of those issues in some of our meetings. We covered everything from logistics, where and when to meet, participants, who's invited, the leadership. And I'm going to talk about leadership today because I believe that that's the key component of ensuring that our partnerships work. When I was talking a little bit earlier about my grandmothers, every year at that annual dance at the Wichitas, they camped. Every year they stayed longer and longer. They didn't want to go home, so they would stay camped. One year they camped all the way into December and the snow fell and they were out there in the snow and the cold. But in the community building, every morning they would go there and they would make coffee, they'd fix breakfast. Pretty soon, more and more people from the community would show up there in the mornings to have coffee. They talked about, as you can imagine, they talked about issues that the community was facing. They talked about things that could be done. They gossiped, which sometimes is difficult in our communities because the gossip can get out of control. But it's amazing how that their little get together in the morning started having some very positive effect on our community. So it can be as simple as that. But when we're talking about these community collaborative partnerships, who will lead or facilitate meetings? That's important. That's very important. How to deal with disruptive participants, as I mentioned. And then how do we assess our progress? How do we know when we're doing the right thing in our community partnerships? Okay, so let's just say now that we have an active community partnership. You have a community partnership in your community that you've either started, that you're a participant in, or you're one of the ones we've been waiting for, and you're going to start this community collaborative partnership. How do we build that collaborative effort, and then how do we improve on that collaborative effort? That's kind of what we want to talk about today. So today we're going to discuss improving a collaborative partnership. What are effective strategies for overcoming common challenges to multidisciplinary collaboration? Multidisciplinary means coming from, as I like to term it, different silos. We've got all these different silos that each have different portfolios, different responsibilities. And what we need to do is we want to bring them together. And we're going to talk about building trust, improving communications, identifying the right resources, and choosing effective leaders. Again, I don't think I can emphasize that enough. Effective leaders. We're looking for leadership, not dictatorship, leadership. All of these things are going to be in support of problem solving to prevent crime in our tribal communities, prevent crime and address crime. Okay, we've got our group, our partnership formed or planning to be formed. What's next? In this picture, actually on this slide, is my grandpa Walter Lamar. So I'm named after him, and it's nice that I feel very fortunate to have this picture because there were very few pictures of him. But I have this picture, and every time I see it, I feel like he's looking at me and impressing upon me the importance of my responsibility to carry on for our community. Well, I want to talk about that group leadership that I mentioned earlier, and recognizing that, in my estimation, without good leadership, we stand little chance to enact positive change. So before I move on to this leadership-specific discussion, I want to talk about the television show Survivor. I'm not truly what you would call a TV addict, but I do like to watch some shows. For those of you who haven't watched this reality show, and I got to tell you, anytime I say reality TV, I use that term very loosely because reality TV is a misnomer. It's actually contrived reality, which would be more like it. But for those of you that have not seen the show, it's always set in a remote tropical paradise, and it is pitting groups of participants against each other in physical and mental challenges. And that's both individually and in teams. The show is so interesting to watch from the group dynamic perspective. And the guy that's depicted on this slide is a retired FBI agent who I knew when I was in the FBI. And I think he's probably like 72, 73. So the physical challenges were a bit tough due to his age, but he played a very strong mental game, and he played last year. And his tactic was to keep a very low profile and let others maneuver for position. So when you watch this show, it gives a real insight. No matter how contrived the reality is, it still gives a real insight into how groups work or don't work. Leaders emerge, strategists maneuver, followers decide who to follow, schemers attack, lie, and deceive. I got to tell you, this truly the show is an exaggerated set of group dynamics. And the goal for these folks that are on here is for an individual win. So they're looking to win for themselves as opposed to what we want to promote as winning for our community. But that said, watching shows like this can still be valuable to watch from a learning perspective. What motivates people? What are people willing to do? How are people able to perpetrate deceit and deception? And then what inspires loyalty? You see, as I said, leaders emerge, and then what inspires the traits that these leaders have that are common to all that seem to inspire this loyalty and seem to inspire a following. It's important for us to have that understanding as we look to put leadership in a premier spot in our community collaborative partnerships. How many of you have been to meetings or gatherings or forums, and these gatherings and forums are there where leaders have not been selected or identified? Sometimes a person or persons, they just step up to take charge, to establish organization. But even then it can create uncertainty or resentment when the leader has not been selected or officially designated. An absence of leadership simply leaves a group to stumble along aimlessly, leaving participants frustrated and unlikely to return for subsequent meetings. Now, I did mention in a previous webinar that a community partnership could be just a routine meeting with a limited number of participants to inform to informally exchange information. In those cases, discussion can simply be guided by interpersonal skills. When you have informal meetings, as I talked about in the last webinar, where maybe you just have the chief of police, the director of social services, and maybe the director of housing, they meet on Thursday for coffee. Well, there only needs to be the interpersonal skills that would guide those kinds of meetings for exchanges of information. But in a true group discussion, as we're talking about today with a collaborative community partnership, where we're going to employ a problem-solving model, a designated leader is an absolute must. So selecting a leader seems like as we're talking about these larger issues of community collaborative partnerships, selecting a leader seems like kind of a minor point in that overall discussion. But in my opinion, there's nothing more critical than making sure a leader is properly selected. Now, my advice is that a facilitator be designated to manage the first meeting of the group. And now this comes from me having attended a number of these kickoffs. I believe that having a facilitator designated, that somebody be designated to organize and manage that first meeting. And as a facilitator, a designated facilitator guides the discussion about an identified community issue or issues of concern and engages in a series of introductory activities. And those activities can be as simple as going around the table and talking about each person's role in the community, what their job is, what they do, who they are. Participants will start identifying a person or even persons with leadership potential. What are we conditioned to look for in a leader? Well, it's my belief that the first thing that we look for a person that we can trust. Most importantly, it's a person who we believe will act in the best interest of the group and one who demonstrates accountability. So in other words, they do what they say they're going to do. Now, I know we're in this first meeting, and we may not know that from the first meeting if somebody has that ability to follow through. But typically in our communities, we have some familiarity with folks. I mean, most times we know who's who in our communities. And there's a downside to that as well. Because a good potential leader might be your sister's ex-husband from an acrimonious divorce, right? So what we have to do is we have to first get past all of our interpersonal baggage, the baggage that we carry into these meetings, the baggage that we have gathered in our lives and living in the community. Is getting past that, getting past the petty, sometimes these long-term interpersonal issues. Got to get past those. According to Christiana Greenwood, and she's the director and founder of FM Innovations, the hallmarks of a good leader are integrity, and integrity is the core underpinning for leadership effectiveness. It's a blend of honesty, consistency, which I think is incredibly important, and ethics. If a leader's integrity is thrown into doubt, it's difficult, if not impossible, to maintain trust. Passion. And I'll just say this, I'm 62 years old, and I've recognized at this time in my life how important passion is. We have to be passionate about something, about some things, so that it enables a person who is in a leadership position to keep moving forward because they're passionate, even in tough times. And it inspires the people around them to work harder towards their goals, to also be passionate. Passionate, basically, passion can be infectious, and other people will feel that, recognize it, and begin to mimic that passion for the effort that the community is striving for. Courage. Courage, as you know, is necessary to make difficult decisions. Now, I said earlier, we're looking for leadership, not dictatorship. So they're not going to be making all the decisions because there's going to be shared decision making. But we know at the end of the day, there's always that one person who has to say, you know what, we've discussed this long enough, this is the direction we're going to move. And then when facing conflicts and mediating group conflict, so often it's easy just to say, okay, let's get past this, let's move on. And we move on without resolving the conflict. We move on just to get past the conflict because it's uncomfortable. A courageous leader will address and resolve conflict. Courage springs from a leader's core values and commitment to a vision. All right, so we want to have a leader, number 4, that has a vision. And without a compelling vision or destination, how can a leader effectively persuade people to group goals? Visionary leaders, they inspire others to imagine a better future and work to achieve it. Vision. Then 5th in this lineup is judgment. Actually, achieving a vision requires good judgment. Good judgment allows a leader to make solid decisions and choices. When confronting a difficult new challenge, leaders, they have to quickly focus on the most important issues, not let the group drift off into meaningless discussion, but key in on important issues. They must be able to prioritize and make difficult trade-offs. When I say make difficult trade-offs, so we've got a meth problem, and we have graffiti is going out of control, and then graffiti is an indication of gang activity. And then we also have issues of incredible issues of truancy in our schools. Well, those 3 issues are all issues that we want to deal with in a community, that we want to address. But sometimes we have to make a trade-off and say, this is where we're going first. This is what we're going to prioritize. And then we will address the issue of graffiti maybe at a later date. Keeping in mind that the possible unintended consequences of decisions, leaders have to constantly be mindful of unintended consequences. We can make what we think are the best decisions and with a good heart, and all of a sudden there's some kind of unintended consequence that we didn't think about because we didn't explore every avenue of that decision. Number 6, empathy. No matter the group composition, there's diversity. There's always going to be diversity in every group. Each community member has a different personality, motivation, and underlying agenda. Empathy is that attribute that allows a leader to effectively understand what makes other people tick and puts them in the best position to achieve their own goals and those of the organization. Empathy gives a leader the upper hand when dealing with group dynamics, getting to the core of any discord quickly and addressing it is an important aspect of any leadership role. And lastly, I'll say emotional intelligence. And oddly enough, just only a few days ago, my wife accused me of not having any emotional intelligence. I'll disagree with that. But anyway, while empathy is externally focused, emotional intelligence is internally focused. An emotionally intelligent leader habitually takes a hard, honest look at themselves and accurately discerns their strengths, weaknesses, and blind spots. Putting personal pride aside, they actively solicit the input of others and incorporate the group's best ideas into the overall action plan. Without emotional intelligence, a leader can sometimes overestimate their own ability, thus alienating others. Leadership selection, and I hope you're staying with me on this in terms of recognizing the importance of a leader in our community collaborative partnership. So typically, when we're going to go into this leadership selection, and I'm looking at this at very basically, so that very first meeting that gets pulled together, leadership candidates they'll emerge as a facilitator takes a group through a set of activities that include introductions, discussion of community issues of concern, and roles that each participant plays in a community. I mentioned this in the last webinar, I attended a meeting, and there's probably 50 people that had showed up for this to create this community collaborative partnership, to create essentially an entity that was going to address some of these community problems. We went through a whole morning of discussion, and I was actually a facilitator. And we got to the point where we selected a leader. And it was a leader who, throughout that whole morning, had kind of started emerging into this leadership position. And for the most part, it was almost, I would say, a unanimous selection that she was going to be the leader. And then almost as soon as she was named, stood up and thanked everybody, a person jumped up and said, "There's no way that I'm going to be part of an organization where she's a leader because her daughter is a heroin dealer." Well, you can imagine that just sucked the energy out of the place right then. So it was up to then me as a facilitator to be able to still move in and address that as quickly as possible so that it didn't fester and create a problem where this community collaborative partnership was dead on arrival. We were able to get past it and work past it. So the facilitator can, as you're looking at selecting this leadership, you can ask for people who are willing to serve. You can call for nominations. I mean, it's down to the very basics, just figuring out how do we select this leader. I got to tell you though, it's absolutely important to ensure that leadership candidates that they are willing to serve and not simply drafted against their will. Again, I say leadership is key to ensuring a group can come together, stay together, and serve the best interests of the community. So never underestimate the importance of solid leadership in making this happen. So the group, and as you know, and you've seen these things come together, it can either be a show of hands or by ballot. No matter how it's done, there needs to be a vote so that the leader or the leadership of this community collaborative partnership is selected by the entire group. It's also my suggestion, and this is just from having done this a number of times, that the leader be voted in for an interim period of time. And then during that time, and as much as I hate to say this, I think every group has to have some kind of guidance, a document that sets down a framework for how the group will operate. So during this interim period of time, the leader will be responsible for working with the group to come up with this template that will be drafted and by which the group can operate. At that point, then the group will have had an opportunity to assess whether that is the person they want to lead or whether there is someone else. So I think that interim period gives the group time to settle in and determine who they are looking for to be the leader, to be the leadership. Yeah, it's just as simple as just having that additional time to do that. This picture is this is Ralph Zokai. He's from the Kiowa tribe, and he is when we talk about things, the traditions and things that we've got to save. He has a tremendous voice and is able to sing so many songs of so many tribes. So the leader, we want to now talk about this leader. Mind Tools, MINDTOOLS.com. It's a good website to find all kinds of information on group dynamics and group leadership. I like to go to that, and I like to read, and it gives me some ideas of, about helping to form these groups, because I get called on routinely to help form these community collaborative partnerships. And so one of the things that I saw on this mindtools.com and things that we talked about a little bit earlier about the hallmarks of effective leadership. So what we want to do is we want to use those hallmarks that we talked about earlier, or that they're hallmarks or traits of an effective leader. And through those traits and hallmarks, a good, strong leader will communicate an inspiring vision for the future, motivate and inspire people to engage with that vision, manage delivery of the vision. And they're always good coaches and team builders, and that's effective at achieving our vision. So too often, though, our community collaborative partnerships, they kind of drift into, or they function more like a club than a working organization. Turns into more like a club function. Show up, socialize, visit a little bit, and then go on their way. Nothing really happens. If we're simply gathered together to exchange information, then that's fine. I mean, you can come together like that, talk about issues of mutual concern, exchange information, and go on. However, as I said earlier, if we are employing a problem-solving model to approach or address a community issue of concern, well, let's just say, for example, open-air drug dealing, then it is absolutely incumbent upon the group and the group leadership to establish a vision with attendant goals to ensure effective measures are enacted. So the group becomes more of a working group than simply a club meeting or meeting once a month to share information. It then has purpose. Leaders help themselves and others do the right things. They set direction, they build an inspiring vision, they create something new. Leadership is about mapping out where we need to go to win as a community. And it's dynamic, exciting, and inspiring. Without that, trust me, no group is going to last long. So that's the key to sustainability. Is it realistic? I say it is, but you know what? It's hard work. It's hard work to maintain that kind of enthusiasm, to be able to maintain that kind of effort, because it is hard work. But I got to tell you, I believe that our community well-being is worth every bit of that effort that is required. So we talked a little bit earlier the importance of trust, because that's the first thing that we look for in a leader. And then we've got to trust each other, trust the other participants. Um, and as we develop and work to develop the trust of the leader, we have to trust each other. We know that trust is something that's always earned and it's never given freely. A leader, by demonstrating the 7 hallmarks of leadership that we mentioned earlier, demonstrating those in a consistent manner, creates a foundation of trust. And to fully earn the trust, a leader must demonstrate accountability. So often, and I know you'll agree with me on this, so often we end up in meetings, because you've been to these meetings, that we foster, so many great ideas, so much thought, so much discussion, but then nothing happens. All talk, no action. A true leader will hold themselves and others accountable for action. Then and only then will trust be earned. I like to equate it to driving a stake in the ground. Okay, driving a stake in the ground. Imagine that in your mind. It's a positive, tangible action. A stake in the ground can be a first action in a series of planned events. So I like to use as an example as a prescription drug take-back program. Prescription drugs have been demonstrated over and over to be a gateway to heroin, and have posed significant difficulties on our communities and in our communities. So we've got to get prescription drugs, those drugs that are either expired or no longer being used. We got to get them out of the homes, off the street. So a drug take-back program is absolutely a great effort to do that. So the overall goal would be to get those prescription drugs off the street. A simple first step, driving a stake in the ground, a simple first step might include coordination with DEA to set up a prescription drug take-back site. All we got to do is publish the place, date, and time and publicize it. That's driving a stake in the ground. It's tangible, it's positive, it's a first step. It's a simple step, but an affirmative step. Driving that stake in the ground can be oh so important. Driving a stake in the ground creates positive forward movement. It demonstrates to the group the possibilities and what we can do together to move forward. A leader that motivates a group to action is a leader that can be trusted. Hopefully. Typically. New collaborative partnerships will benefit by ensuring, among other organizational goals, because when we bring something together like that, there's a number of things that we have to do organizationally. But among those other things, we got leadership that's selected, and it's going to be based on our discussion so far. And in existing partnerships that you have in your communities, you should take a look and use this opportunity to ensure that leadership is appropriately evaluated based on, again, what we've talked about to this point. Improving communication. I got to tell you, Cindy talked about what my career is. I've got 30-something years of career experience. The lesson that I learned early on, and it was in the FBI, and it was what I think was pretty basic, pretty simple. We get a call back to the office. One of the agents believes that he has a great information where a bank robber is going to show up. So, we have a whiteboard. It gets all drawn out. We get all the information. We get a picture of the bank robber. We get where we're going to be set up at this house. Turns out I'm set up a block and a half away behind the house. I'm excited because I think, if that guy is able to get out of the back of the house and get through a couple of yards, he'll be mine. I'll have a chance. I'll be the guy that's going to catch this guy. So we all get out there. We have radios in our cars, and people are on the radios. They're talking. Okay, I'm here. I'm set up. This is what I see. This is what I'm doing. And then all of a sudden, then pretty soon, that radio communication starts to taper off, and then it goes to nothing. Well, now we're into this thing for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, and we're not hearing any kind of communication on the radio whatsoever. Well, I'm sitting there, and I start thinking, why'd they put me way back here? Well, I think the guy put me back here because he's jealous, because I'm the guy that usually catches the bank robbers. I'm the guy that has arrested a lot of bank robbers. I think he put me back here to make sure that I'm out of the mix, that I don't have a chance at catching this guy, that he'll be able to catch the guy. And I start talking myself into this kind of this crazy state of being, and now an hour and a half goes by, and I start getting distrustful, mistrustful of the people I'm working with. Cindy, were you going to say something? I th- okay, I thought maybe I went off air there for a minute.
Nope, you're good. Sound great.
All right. So, so as I'm sitting out in this car, pretty soon I start thinking, maybe this whole thing is just a big joke. Maybe they have me sitting here and everybody, they made this thing up and everybody left and they've all gone back to the office and they're laughing and talking about how idiotic I am still sitting out here. Now I'm starting to get angry and I'm just sitting in the car by myself and I start working myself into this to an anger, almost to a frenzy. I'm like, what the heck's going on here? And then all of a sudden on the radio crackles, a voice comes on and says, the guy got pulled over by the cops on the way over here. He's arrested. Everybody's free to go on their way. That simple. Everybody drives off. But for me, it was as I look back on it, it was a tremendous education, because what I realized is that once people are not communicated with, when we're not talking to people, keeping folks informed, that they don't hear something, then mistrust, distrust, folks start getting angry, they start talking themselves into a frenzy. Communication is absolutely critical in everything that we do. In a community collaborative partnership, communication is absolutely key, because we're bringing people together from these different silos, and that communication is so critically important. So even if we're successful in encouraging group members to work hard and to work towards these group goals, the group may fail because they don't share information or communicate openly. We have to foster that communication. A group leader is important in creating those norms of open discussion and creating this discussion amongst these even smaller decision-making groups. An effective leader makes sure that he or she does not state their opinions so much. Again, as I said, we're looking for leadership, not dictatorship, but rather allows the other group members to express ideas and encourages a presentation of contrasting positions, communication. In our last webinar, we again talked about the reason for good solid lines of communication. And the keys to some of these good solid lines of communication that requires one to listen. Okay, these are kind of simplistic, and bear with me on it, but I think they're important. We got to listen. We have to pay attention and let the other person talk without interrupting. I've been to meetings on the Navajo Reservation back when I was in BIA law enforcement. Traditionally, what would happen is if you're going to talk, then you would have to recognize the other folks in the room. So you'd say, Honorable Committee Chairman, Honorable Committee Vice Chairman, Honorable Committee Secretary, and you'd go through and basically mention every person in the room before you could talk. It was an incredible thing, because nobody's interrupting, everybody, when you spoke, you definitely had your thoughts together, and it was what you believed was absolutely important. So it cut out any kind of chatter, cut out interruptions. It formalized a meeting, but it formalized it in a way that truly improved communication. So you want to be engaged without interrupting, even when you don't agree. Sometimes when we don't agree, we want to burst in there and throw out what our ideas are, and this is where you're wrong. Listen. There's a big difference between engaged listening and simply hearing. When you really listen, you're engaged with what's being said. You'll hear the subtle intonations in someone's voice that tell you how that person is feeling, and the emotions they're trying to communicate. When you're an engaged listener, not only will you better understand the other person, you'll also make that person feel heard and understood, which can help build a stronger, deeper connection between the two of you. I mentioned this at a meeting I was at one time, and people got all over me. But it's be on time. It's a matter of respect. And when I brought this up in a meeting at one point, because people were just straggling in when they felt like it, they're like, well, it's a cultural thing. You don't understand. Yeah, I do understand. As I said, I grew up on reservations all my life. I understand that we talk about Indian time. Well, that's fine if there aren't people that are counting on you, waiting on you. Time these days is valuable, and it's respectful to be on time. It's respectful to be ahead of time. I usually show up about 10 minutes ahead of time. So if someone's 5 minutes late, that's 15 minutes. If it's 10 minutes late, right? So then it's like, then all of a sudden, in some cases, I've been waiting a half an hour or more. So it's a matter of respect. We got to think about, as we make these connections, developing the respect as well as trust. We got to be empathetic, understand and share the feelings of others. We got to ask follow-up questions. That's too is about connecting. We want to ask questions because then it demonstrates that we're listening. We got to be brief, but we got to be specific. Sometimes, and you're probably saying that about now, is like, can this guy be a little bit more brief? But be brief, be specific. Don't be distracted. Stay positive and engaged. And I have to tell you, phones are a major distraction. It's amazing. Everybody's got one. Everybody's looking at it. And when you're in front of a group, and when you're working with a group, when you're talking to folks, and their face is buried in a phone, then number one, it's distracting them, and it's distracting you, and it feels very much like a matter of disrespect. So don't be distracted. When people are talking, put the phone down, put it away, even turn it off when you go into a meeting. I know we're all important and we've got to be connected, but I'm not sure that we're all that important. Be mindful of body language. I think some of you can, as you're seeing me on the video thing here, my hands are going, I'm talking. Nonverbal signals. We got to be mindful of those when we're in meetings and especially when we're talking. Because if I'm talking and my arms are crossed, guess what? That means I'm not looking to get any feedback. I'm just making a statement. People tapping their feet, then they're getting impatient. Averting eye contact. There's a reason when that happens. They're averting eye contact. So that has to sometimes be addressed pretty quickly. Saying no while shaking a head yes. When I was with the FBI, I went to a house. We're going to looking to arrest a guy. His girlfriend came to the front door, and I said, is Billy Jones here? We're at the FBI. And she says, no, and she's shaking her head up and down. No, he's not here, because that body language took over. So we knew he was there. Yeah, found him, arrested him. But be mindful of that. Watch your body language and be mindful of the body language of the person who's talking. As I said, attempt to resolve conflict. And we got to agree that it's okay to disagree. I mean, we're never going to agree with everything that gets said. We're not going to agree with every person and what they say. But you know what we got to do is we got to watch the tone. We got to watch our tone, and then we've got to be mindful of their tone. Our tone should always be calm and cooperative. Doesn't mean we're folding up like a cheap tent. What it means is that we understand it's okay to disagree, and we're willing to continue to be engaged in a way that is going to be productive. Try to set aside judgment. I mentioned earlier, we all bring our kind of personal baggage to the table, things that people know about us, things that people know about our families. We're going to set that judgment aside. We can't judge others that are sitting at the table with us. We all got to come to the table with open minds. To communicate effectively with someone, you don't have to like them or agree with their ideas, their values, or even their opinions. But you do need to set aside your judgment and withhold blame, criticism in order to fully understand a person. And I say this, and I don't mean for you to take it the wrong way, but nobody can be meaner to Indians than Indians. I mean, it's astounding how mean we can be to each other. We have to get past that. We've got to work past it, and we have to work past it in a constructive way. The most difficult communication, when successfully executed, can lead to the most unlikely and profound connection with someone. Sometimes it's difficult to communicate, but then once that communication starts, sometimes we can connect with people like we never thought we could. Assert yourself. Being assertive means expressing your thoughts, feelings, and needs in an open and honest way. You got to stand up for yourself and respecting, and while doing so, respecting others. Being assertive doesn't mean being hostile, aggressive, or demanding. Effective communication is always about understanding the other person, not about winning an argument or forcing your opinions on others. Provide feedback and request feedback. Most important is show appreciation. Just simply say thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating. Thank you for showing me respect. And thank you for listening. Group communication. And this slide is, I know it's a little bit blurry because I copied it from the online training that we're building out. And the online training will use caricatures. And it's kind of a scenario-based storytelling. I really do like the platform, and I like the way this training is being put together. And it'll be over the coming months that we're continuing to work on it, that it will be released. So group communication. Leader must establish and express a belief in the value of the work. If we don't believe that there's value to what we're doing, guess what? We're not going to come back, and we're not going to continue to be engaged. The group should set clear goals for every meeting right at the start. We want to accomplish a specific thing as we're together today in this meeting. Setting a goal for the group signals accountability for the success of the meeting. We'll have a successful meeting when we have a reason to be meeting. Create an avenue for back and forth communication. If attendees have no means or reason to interact, then what the heck? You might as well just record the thing and record a video and send it out. It's this personal interaction. And I have to tell you, even on these webinars, I know you guys are all out there, but it's very difficult when there's no interaction back and forth. I can't see your eyes. I can't see how you're setting. I can't see if you're on your phone. There's no feedback back and forth. So we have to create that in our community collaborative partnerships. We've got to create that back and forth communication. Understand that service providers each have their own language. I'm not sure where each of you, where you work or what you do in your work lives, whether it's law enforcement, behavioral health, whether it's health services, whether it's emergency providers, whether it's education. All of us have our own language. A leader must make sure that participants speak in a common language. Clarify silo speak. When I said silos, we consider that basically the jobs, positions that you have in a community. You're in these different silos. So we got to clarify that language. Social workers use a verbiage common to their work. Cops use cop talk. Housing uses even a different kind of speak. Behavioral health, it has its own specific way. So keys is to always try to use a common language, or at the very least explain silo talk, and then we can introduce it into the common language, into our common verbiage. The first step in team building is to introduce an understanding of each participant's role in the community. What does your job or position require? Sometimes we take for granted that others understand what we do and how we do it. but oftentimes there's no such understanding beyond simple definitions. Folks may understand what policing is, but may have no idea how complex jurisdictional issues might be, have no idea what a police officer deals with on a regular basis. He or she may be the only person on a shift frantically running from call to call. Coming together from a cross-section of our community requires us to better understand each other's roles, areas of responsibility, and method of communication. In our groups, we want to distribute the power and responsibility. I hate to use the word power, but it is. We're basically leadership and responsibility. The leader of a meeting can increase participation by assigning roles to discussion leaders, having multiple presenters, being able to ask open-ended rather than yes or no questions. At the end of the meeting, I think this is critical, at the end of every meeting, we have to have a list of who is responsible for each next action and when it's due, a task list. Because what did we talk about earlier? Accountability. What did we talk about earlier? Being able to ensure that there are tangible results of what we're doing, or it won't be long, we won't be doing anything together in a community partnership. Encourage and acknowledge every participant's contributions to the meeting. All of us like to hear, you know what, thanks, I appreciate you being here. It was important that you were here. Finally, just like I'll say to you guys, it's very important that you're here. We appreciate you being on this webinar. Finally, just say thank you. It's such a powerful way to acknowledge a participant's time and input. Okay, well, I don't know if this is necessarily what we would always want to classify as a strategy, but for today's purposes, I'm going to call this our strategy. You know, you may or may not have noticed, but up to this point, I don't refer to our community collaborative partnerships as teams. I've been calling them groups. I got to tell you, I reserve the term team for a group that has transitioned to a fully functioning cadre of folks, moving in the right direction, moving in the same direction. Then we have a team. So we're going to say this is our strategy. Know your group. Know who's in your group. Know the makeup of your group. Know how your group functions. Tackle problems quickly with good feedback. Don't let issues fester. Tackle the problems quickly. Define roles and responsibilities. Who's going to do what and when are they going to have it done? Break down the barriers. We've got to break down these barriers between silos. And I got to tell you, people who think there aren't barriers, they're not in reality, because law enforcement looks at everybody without a badge sometimes as not having a position. So law enforcement, they start counting on each other, they rely on each other, and they believe they're in their silos on their own. Social services, it's like the things that they see every day, the things that they work through every day, the child abuse, the child neglect. Pretty soon they feel like they're all alone in their silo and nobody else can understand what they're going through, and nobody else is working as hard as they work. No one else understands. We have to break down those barriers. We have to break down those barriers and understand what each silo is engaged in. Focus on communication, pay attention, keep a written record of meetings with assigned tasks. So I know that I've gone over on our time, and I'm going to work to, we've actually budgeted an hour and a half for this webinar, but our intent is to get through the core of the webinar in the first hour and leave 30 minutes for some questions. I've got about, I don't know, I think 5 more slides, 6 more slides. So I'm going to go ahead and work through these and try to get through them a little bit quicker. So let's see, we're on slide 19 right now. On slide 20. A group with a positive dynamic is easy to spot. We can see a group that's working together, moving ahead, creating tangible results. Members trust one another. They work towards a collective decision. They hold one another accountable for making things happen. Researchers have found that when a team has a positive dynamic, positive group dynamic, as we've talked about, its members are nearly twice as creative as an average group. Nearly twice as creative as an average group. Imagine that. In a group with poor group dynamics, people's behavior disrupts the effort. As a result, the group may end up completely dysfunctional. Can't make decisions, doesn't move ahead. I've spent considerable time talking about designating a group leader. I do believe that a positive, strong, dynamic leader in touch with the community is absolutely necessary in moving a group to a team. That said, each of us has a leadership role to make a collaborative community partnership a reality. So what is that leadership role? I got to tell you, a leadership role can be as simple as you attending every meeting, being there on time, engaged, and ready to interact. Your example sets a tone. Setting a tone is absolutely leadership. This slide, and I'm not going to get off on this tangent, but every person in the community is a piece of the puzzle. We each see different things. If you're managing a convenience store, you might see an uptick in baby formula being stolen. Well, that has to do with, potentially has to do with drugs, using the formula to cut drugs. There may be an uptick that the school teacher sees where more students are truant. We may be starting to see these trends and upticks. Well, if we don't come together as a group, come together and bring all that information together, it's all just individual pieces of a puzzle that don't give us a picture of what's going on in our community. I got to tell you that, I mentioned this earlier, not as serious as some issues, but we got to, in our communities, deal with the nuisance crimes of vandalism and graffiti. They're very basic crimes, and they are crimes. And we're all pretty much familiar with the broken window theory. One window gets broken, it's not fixed. That demonstrates what? No one cares. No one is held accountable. More windows get broken. More windows get broken and appear in our housing areas, in our communities. Then our community starts a downward slide. So unaddressed, vandalism and graffiti signals that a community is in a state of dysfunction. So we should use that. Use vandalism, graffiti as an example for a starting point for your community collaborative effort. Then in this step one, I agree that community concerns justify bringing together a community partnership. And I have to say, I don't know of any tribal community. I've been in tribal communities all over this country. I don't know of a single tribal community that wouldn't benefit by bringing together community members, including service providers. I don't know of a single community that wouldn't benefit from putting this together. So we want to identify who those participants are, and that in itself is an important step forward. It's driving a stake in the ground, because we say you guys are each responsible for important areas of our community, and we want your buy-in. We want tribal leadership buy-in, we want your buy-in, and we want to come together and create an organization, create this community collaborative partnership. Consider, discuss issues of concerns. When we come together, we're going to be considering and discussing these issues. Here's an example of graffiti. So if we go back to that Sarah model, we're going to use that to scan. Where's the graffiti and vandalism presenting itself most prominently in our community, for how long, and the consequences of the activity. Let's establish a goal. What would the goal be? The goal would be to remove current graffiti, remove graffiti as it is discovered, as it's being painted onto the side of our buildings. We're going to get it taken off as quickly as it goes up. Establish a mural program. That way, young people who want to express their art, they can express it in a mural program. Invigorate community pride. Then we go to the analysis part of the Sarah model. Is the graffiti gang related? We want to analyze how it is, why it is, what it is. Document the problem. In this case, we want to document it with photographs. Then we respond. We come together as this group and we respond. We brainstorm ideas to address the issue. Maybe jail inmates might be the answer. We'll use them and housing staff to clean up graffiti and repair these acts of vandalism. Seek to identify the perpetrators. Here's where law enforcement, school teachers, and housing might, as we come together, bring our pieces of the puzzle to the table, might identify who it is that is behind most of the graffiti and vandalism. Then we assess, is there a reduction of graffiti and vandalism? Well, you know what? That's pretty easy to see. We go out into our housing areas and we look. Is there a reduction? Is there zero graffiti? Is there less graffiti? Then we're able to assess the difference that we've made. So to quickly recap some of my key thoughts from what we've talked about today, it may have seemed pretty basic on what we've talked about, but I still think that it's incredibly important. A common vision and purpose, broad-based representation. The more people we have representing more functions in our community, the better off we're going to be. Resources. So often we talk about resources being so limited. We're limited by funding, limited by resources. We're rich in resources. We have our people, and our people of our communities are the richest resource that we have. So we're resource rich. We just need to be able to call on them in the right way and engage them in these community collaborative partnerships. Shared leadership and decision making. As I said, we're looking for leadership, not dictatorship. Realistic goals and objectives. You know, if we say we're going to come in here and we're going to eradicate heroin in our community, that's probably not a very realistic goal. What we're going to do is we're going to address it, we're going to inform, we're going to educate. If we have to, we're going to bring naloxone into communities so that people can maybe save their relatives during a drug overdose. But we're going to have realistic goals and objectives, things that we can truly accomplish, because if we create goals and we don't achieve them, then once again, that's another way that our community collaborative partnerships go to the wayside. Ongoing and effective communication. And I talked about that. That is so absolutely critical. Tangible results. If we're showing tangible results, people will join us, people will encourage us, the community will recognize the positivity that's coming from the activity. Document and evaluate. We want to document these issues because that's the only way we can evaluate and make sure that we're moving in the right direction, creating positive momentum. Lastly, recognition and celebration. All too often, we are so busy moving from issue to issue, case to case. We're so busy at work that when we succeed, we fail to recognize ourselves and we fail to celebrate positive accomplishment. We have to celebrate, take the time to celebrate positive accomplishment always. So with that, I apologize to you for going over on the time. I will say again, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. And to me, that's a strong indication that you take your role in your community seriously, and that these community partnerships are important to you. And you're the ones we've been waiting for. You're the ones that will start these partnerships. And I always want to stay available to you. It doesn't cost anything to call me. You can find our website very easily if you just Google Lamar Associates. You can find me. You can always contact me and ask questions, advice, help, whatever I can do. I'm always here. So with that, we're going to go to any kind of questions and comments. And if you have a question or comment, feel free to type it into the message bar. If not, we've been at this for an hour, 20 minutes, which is a fair amount of time to be on the internet. So I'm not seeing any questions, and I am going to thank Cindy for putting this together, Cindy, in terms of getting us signed on, making sure that our webinar platform is going. And Valerie, I appreciate your comment, and thank you. And I appreciate very much that you were with us today. And feel free to share this the recorded version of this presentation with folks you think might benefit from it. So with that, Cindy, I am going to go ahead and sign us off.
Thank you, Walter. And as a reminder, if you do come up with any questions, feel free to email us, info@lamarassociates.net. Also, we will send out a notice once the video has uploaded with a link so that you can share this with your community. Also, watch for our constant contacts. They will have links to the webinar today and other recorded sessions that you might have missed. Please be sure to complete the survey that you'll be directed to immediately following the end of this broadcast. And we thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today.